Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you the video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to give my first impressions of the Season 14 changes, as there has been an absolute ton of things that have been changed over the last couple of weeks. Now obviously, the patch is still new, and this is one of the biggest patches that we have ever had. As a result, this is not my opinion for the foreseeable future. Think of this more as first impressions of how I'm seeing Season 14 shaping up, as well as potentially future years of League of Legends going forwards. Let's start off by talking about the biggest changes, of course, those made to the Summoner's Rift map. I mentioned before that this is the biggest change that I've ever seen in my time with League of Legends, and I meant it. The repercussions of this change will have an impact for years to come as we continue to learn and experiment and improve at playing the new map. Mostly, I think the changes feel alright. Summoner's Rift feels mostly the same, especially if you're a laner. The paths to your lane might vary a little bit, but it doesn't feel like you're learning a brand new map in the same way that your first time playing Nexus splits might have felt. Having more time to see ganks coming in the top and mid lanes certainly helps. I think it does make mages / less mobile champions feel a little bit better to play. But on that note, the middle of top lane and all of mid lane feel exceptionally spacious. This is both a good and a bad thing. I've been asking for more wide open spaces in League of Legends for a while now, but it almost feels like Riot have gone too far with these changes because you really feel just completely naked and exposed when you're standing in the middle of mid lane. And it doesn't feel like there's a lot of cover to work with. It really kind of feels like the minion wave is the only degree of cover you're going to get against enemy champions, which may or may not actually matter, right? It's kind of a weird feeling. Again, not necessarily a bad thing, but sort of a weird one. Bot lane has definitely been made a little bit easier to gank. I do think that the path behind the red team bot lane is an interesting one for gank opportunities, though I don't think it's going to be necessarily particularly powerful. Similarly, in the mid lane, I don't feel like the rear ganks that pass you underneath the tower are going to be particularly potent for ganks, but certainly it's an interesting change to the game that I don't think is bad, but I think is worth playing with a little bit more. That said, there are some changes to the map that I don't think went over too well. Riot mirroring the map across the river instead of across mid lane leads to some per-side advantages that I don't feel are appropriately balanced. For example, the blue team's bot lane can easily walk up into the red team's blue side jungle, which allows their jungle to invade extremely easily in the early stages of the game, because if you have a pushing bot lane, they can push up, you walk into the enemy team's blue side, your bot lane comes up with you because they have an extremely easy access, and you just kind of force the enemy team out of their jungle immediately. This is particularly egregious because of the placement of blue buff and Gromp. It's really easy to take both of those camps and wolves if you're feeling particularly spicy, but conversely, if you're on the red team, trying to do a similar invade into the blue team's red side jungle isn't particularly powerful because Krugs, of course, are sort of separated from everybody else. Red buff is facing away from you, meaning that you have to path deeper into the enemy jungle to have access to it. It's just not exactly the same level of power that you get versus coming from the blue team invading the enemy red team's jungle. And I don't think a similar invasion path really exists on the top side of the map either. So, as a result, it feels like red side just kind of got shafted with these changes. And as a result, some of the per-side advantages that existed in the old map are now completely misaligned. I kind of liked the older map because one team would have the advantage at Baron, one team would have the advantage at Drake. That meant that there was a little bit of a early game versus late game feel to the sides that you picked beyond just the champ select kind of aspects. I think it was a fair trade-off to say, my top lane will be more protected, but my bot lane will be less protected, or vice versa, based on what side you're selecting. Like, these were all things to actually evaluate, and nowadays, I feel like blue side is just objectively the correct choice in every way. Maybe this is still early days. I'm trying to not be old man yells at cloud with these changes, but it certainly feels that way to me, and we'll have to see how those changes shake up as time goes on. Generally, I'm lukewarm on the map changes overall, but that could change at any moment, especially as we continue to learn Summoner's Rift. So, as a whole right now, I'm fine, but I'm also not impressed. Moving on, let's talk about the epic monster updates. First up, starting with the newer epic monsters, the Voidgrubs, and I think they're a really nice addition to the game. They provide a lot more incentive for junglers to hang around the top side of the map instead of always hovering on the bottom side. Having priority on your top laner or mid laner means you can grab a grub or two before heading back to lane. They don't have a collective respawn timer, they do have individual respawn timers, so you can kill one grub, leave, and then go back later on and kill another grub and leave. There's sort of a fun little trade-off in that, though of course you can kill them all at the same time if your jungler is there and you have lots of priority. And grubs giving a permanent boost makes them a trade-off versus Drake. Like, by comparison, Rift Herald gave less guaranteed value out of pro play, which made it less of a fair trade. Like, yeah, our team got Herald in exchange for Drake, but like, are we actually going to use the Herald? Is Herald going to get a charge off? Is the charge going to do anything for the team, or is it just going to be kind of wasted, right? Like, there were a lot of factors that went into Rift Herald being just less of a trade versus the Grubs, where you trade Grubs for Drake. Okay, we both got a permanent power boost. Which one is better? Well, it's kind of going to depend, which I do kind of quite like. The buff is also quite nice when stacked up. You can do a lot of damage to towers sort of for free if you're packing 4 to 6 grub buff on your team overall. And obviously this the grubs being individual means that it's a little bit more contestable than other objectives, right? Like, if you try to contest Drake and the enemy team smites the Drake, well, you're just out of luck. You got nothing for that. By comparison, if you contest grubs and you're able to smite away one of them, like, that matters, because if you're able to steal one grub away from each spawn from the enemy team, even if they get the rest of them, you deny them the might spawns when they start damaging towers, which is a relevant play that you made. Even though you didn't deny them the objective, quote unquote, you still denied them some of the value from the objective, which I think makes it a very interesting one. Also, I love the grubs because they're just such goofy little boys. I love their ugly, unsettling appearance, and the void mites they summon as well on 5 or 6 stacks of the buff. They're just so goofy and so funny. I love just randomly walking away from a tower, and then the mite comes off cooldown, and it pops out and sprints at the tower while dying the whole time. You're just like, oh, get him, little boy! Like, it's so fun. I absolutely love the Voidgrubs, and I think that they should stay absolutely. Rift Herald, by comparison, has had some odd changes. On one hand, I like that players now can micro her to get a degree of value. It disallows the sort of fire and forget gameplay that Rift Herald incentivized before. But that said, having to steer Herald makes her less reliable and ultimately much weaker than before. I feel like even if you just directly steer her into a tower, it's not necessarily optimal. And as a result, it just doesn't feel as good as she was previously. Obviously, you can be a little bit more flexible with Herald. You can use her for initiation or crash her into a tower to take it and then get back on her and ride her off into the sunset to escape. Like, there are some maybe fun things you can do. I've seen pros take towers with her and then run away, like I said. But again, I'm a little lukewarm on the changes. I think she's fine, but I don't think Rift Herald is as compelling as she was before, especially since she doesn't respawn. So if you get her one time, you crash her in a tower, you don't even kill the tower, she dies immediately afterwards, you're just kind of like, oh, was that it? Okay, well, my time was not very well spent top lane then. Baron feels much the same as it was before. The caveat here is that Baron does feel way more durable than before. Taking it with a team that had a Blade of the Rune King Viego and Ashe on the same team took way longer than it felt like it should, which means that Baron is a lot less doable of an objective, but maybe I'm just not used to it quite yet, and there's something I'm missing about the new Baron that makes it easier to kill, or something I'm missing about those games that would have made it easier to kill. Unsure, but it definitely feels like a much harder objective to take. The variant Barons haven't felt particularly notable either. Only one of them really stands out, and that's mostly due to the terrain it summons, not because of itself. The terrain is sort of a nice touch that kind of changes things up, but I haven't really had a good old-fashioned Baron dance with the new Barons or with any of the new Baron terrain, and as a result, Baron feels, again, extremely similar to how it was before. Not much of a change here. However, its summon also causes the Void Blue, Void Red, and Void Scuttler to change, and I am not a fan of these changes. I think Void Scuttler is fine. It exploding into the big Scryer's Bloom blast is totally cool, but Void Blue and Void Red always giving their buffs to every living member of the team that took them, I just don't think is a good change. It really feels like this was it feels like League of Legends with cheat mode active, right? Like, oh, everyone on your team gets blue and red buff all the time whenever they spawn. And as a result, I can really see scenarios where you don't do anything until all your cooldowns are up, your summoner spells are available, you hit your item breakpoints, and you take your blue and red buff to make sure your whole team is as powerful as they could possibly be. And it makes the buffs feel less special, right? Like before it was, oh, I killed that guy, I got doubles off that, that's cool. Now it's anytime I kill a guy, I get doubles. Because everyone has doubles all the time forever, because that's how blue and red buff work nowadays. It's not a good change, and I really hope Riot revert this one. Like, I get that the change was aimed at resolving some of the pain points of there only being one copy of blue and one copy of red available to any given team. Like, there's always going to be one version of each buffs on the jungler specifically, and then usually blue goes to mid lane, red goes to AD carry. There's some math involved in figuring out who should actually have the buffs, which I did think was an interesting decision point, but now it's just take the buff. Everyone gets it, and I don't like that change. I really, of anything else on this patch, I hope this gets reverted because I just don't like how it plays. Finally, Infernal Rift, honestly, feels so much more boring than it did previously. Like, I'm not going to argue that Infernal Rift before was interesting, because of the map destruction at least made it feel a little different, and a little like, oh yeah, that's right, we have Infernal Rift this game. But without any map changes, it feels like you can just ignore the fact that you're on Infernal Rift, right? It's sort of like, what Rift am I even on? I don't actually know, because nothing changed. The Cinder mechanic is kind of neat, but it does feel snowball-y, and also it's hard to tell what kind of value the Cinders are giving. Like, yeah, you can read the numbers and know how much ability haste you're getting, but it's such a small tweak to your available ability haste that is all but unnoticeable in the long run. It feels like you collect a ton of Cinders and you're like, wow, I really must be powerful, right? And you look at your stats and it's like, yeah, you got 3 extra ability haste, chief. That's it. Like, you spent 15 minutes getting there, you got 3 ability haste, and then you die and you lose it all, right? Like, that doesn't feel particularly good to me or interesting to me. I did like the old Infernal Rift better, but I'll give this a little bit more time before I decide that's how I actually feel about it. Finally, I want to talk about the item updates. Now, it's still early days on the itemization update yet. I haven't had an opportunity to play with every single new item because there's a ton. But so far, I feel like there are few balance outliers with regards to the new items. Most everything landed where I think it should have. There are some caveats here. Storm Surge made some waves when it came out. I know it's been nerfed already, and I believe it will be nerfed in the future as well. I think Riftmaker's buffs made it way more attractive to any champion that can take advantage of it. And lethality generally got better across the board. I'm not happy with this change in particular. I liked it being a little backloaded to make it a little less snowbally in comparison to giving all the value up front. Now it feels like just build lethality. If you're remotely a champion that can build lethality, just build it because it's better than anything else you could be doing. Like, that feels a little bad to me. Maybe that's just indicative of the state of League of Legends, where early game power is the only thing that matters and scaling isn't as important as it used to be. Maybe that's where we're at. I don't feel like that's the case, but certainly lethality being so strong does make it feel that way. And I would love to see lethality reverted to where it was before. But I think even with some of these outliers, generally the itemization update has gone over well, in part because Mythics being gone was a huge boon for building items. Being able to pivot your build halfway through an item feels less bad, splashing components feels much better, and items being less power determinative makes for a much better feeling system overall. Like, you can get an item and feel stronger, but not feel like you're so overwhelmingly stronger than you were before, right? Like, in the previous system, getting to your mythic was such a huge power spike that, like, if your opponent doesn't have their mythic and you did, like, you just bully them at this point. Versus the new system where, yeah, your opponent's up an item, they're stronger, but they're not, like, so overwhelmingly strong that you can't possibly fight them back. And I do really like that change of the items being less determinative, and instead the champion play matters a lot more. The tweaks to the support item system as well, I do want to call out because I do think they're excellent. It feels way better to just buy the same thing every game and tweak it as you see fit at the end rather than having to make a decision that ultimately didn't matter early. Like, really, really big fan of the item updates, and this was probably the biggest win of the preseason, or of the new season patch overall. But those are my thoughts, you guys. You should let me know what you think of the new patch down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you like the Void blue and red buffs, for example, or like the map changes, let me know all that down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I will talk to you all later.